And we're recording. All right. Anyone have any opens to add to the meeting before we go through everything? All right. We have a couple of pending proposals on the project board. There's an agenda posted to the Triage meeting Zulip stream. First, we have Lang team number 70. Stop ignoring trailing semicolons in a macro body when a macro is invoked in expression position. So it looks like we have a proposal, a second, no objections. This seems pretty reasonable. It sounds like this is underway. Felix, it looks like you're driving some of this from the language team's perspective. Can you?
At the very least, I offered to act as liaison, yeah.
Right, I was about to ask if you have any updates on this item.
No, I do not.
Okay.
Should we just accept this somehow? Does it need to go on to a next phase of create a charter or something?
I think it may have been accepted, just not fully procedurally. There is already a tracking issue for it, and it's in the process of being implemented now. So I think that was added after your second, Felix. So I believe it has been, and just somebody needs to wrangle the actual Lang team issue 70.
Yeah.
Felix, would you like to take care of that?
Sure, in terms of figuring out what we need to do, sure.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be closed, and a tracking issue. Well, there is already a tracking issue, so
Right.
that tracking issue needs to be added to the board in the appropriate places.
And we need to announce it in some fashion. There's definitely a to announce label on it, or at least there was. So I'll figure this out.
There is a to announce. Usually that suggests that we should create a blog post talking about it. And despite this being a fairly minor change, we may wish to go ahead and do that.
Okay.
And put something together. So that's something where either you or Aaron may want to put something together.
Okay, sounds good.
Just to clarify, the to announce label, at least from like Russbot's perspective, is for this meeting to be announced, but we can also write a blog post.
So to announce in the labels for MCPs is intended to be the equivalent of nominated then?
Sort of, yes.
Interesting. I think that it might make sense for us to rename that then, since nominated usually has more of the implication of let's discuss that in a meeting, and announce sounds more like let's talk about this publicly, but we should figure that out. Regardless, if you think that this would benefit from a public discussion and blog post, Felix, then by all means, we have done that for several other MCPs. If you don't think there's value in that and it just needs to be implemented and then discussed, then either way, as the liaison, by all means.
Okay.
Next up, we have Lang Team 77, which is the MCP for deref patterns. This was discussed fairly extensively on internals and on Zulip, and then brought to an MCP 5 days ago, so this is the first meeting for it. The proposal on the table here is a generalized mechanism to match through deref implementations, so matching boxes, matching strings as stir, matching vex as slices, and so on. So the proposal here, I think this makes a huge amount of sense. There are a couple of issues that need to be dealt with on this, primarily how few times can DREF be called, and is it going to be possible to have exhaustiveness checking given the possibility of non-idempotent implementations of DREF. Has anyone been following the discussion of this on the either Zulip or internals?
I've been reading it occasionally. It seems to me like it's touching on a bunch of things that have been talked about many times, and chartering a project group to look into it and figure out the answer to a bunch of those hard questions makes a lot of sense to me.
I think so as well, yes. The questions are, I think, harder than they look on the surface insofar as sorting out exactly what needs to be done or it won't be able to move forward. But I do think this is generally useful. Some of the issues, I think, just need addressing by the individual people working on this to try to figure out the right solutions and proposals. I think one item that could potentially use language team feedback early on is our general temperature as far as syntax or non-syntax. There was discussion about, do we want to label this syntax explicitly, or do we want to allow this implicitly? Uncharacteristically, because I tend to be the person who would like more explicit syntax in patterns, I actually don't feel that the current proposal needs additional syntax, primarily because it's focused on literals, and I don't think there's a problem with literal matching without an extra sigil. My only concern has been if you're matching a variable with an without an extra sigil and its type is different through a deref.
I think it may also be impacted by other things, like what exactly the trait bounds for this are, if there's an unsafe trait involved, if there's guarantees about transparency and non-side effectness because of that.
That's true,
etc.
yes. Yes, if it can be done entirely safely, then I would say a sigil doesn't seem necessary. If it requires any sort of non-safe or explicit indication that it's okay to use this trait, then that may be a different matter. In any case, does anybody feel the desire to second this, or more to the point, to liaise for this?
I think I'm happy to second it.
I am as well. I do not have liaison bandwidth at the moment.
I suspect that's going to be the problem, right? I think lack of bandwidth.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I will write a quick summary to the issue then, saying that there was general support and we're looking for someone to liaise for this.
I wonder if this is at a point where they want to put together sort of a sketch of a proposal and make a design meeting presentation or something.
I think that that would make sense, but I suspect that we should probably, well, on the one hand, it would be nice to have a liaison to help coordinate that and make sure that it's prepared for a meeting. On the other hand, preparing that and bringing it to a design meeting may potentially help to obtain a liaison. So it might potentially make sense. Do you think that without necessarily volunteering to liaise, Scott, do you think you might be able to work with the presenter to get them ready for a design meeting?
Sure. I can consult at least, probably. So maybe that counts as liaise, we'll see.
Not necessarily. It depends on how much additional stuff needs doing, but I will mention that you will chat with them about coming to a design meeting.
Cool.
Okay. And then feel free to go ahead and second that one. All right, let's take a quick look at the project board to see if there's anything else that needs a status update. Skimming from right to left, we have let's see, there is an MCP proposal that has been closed for pub macro, so I'm not sure why closed RFCs are still showing up on the board. I'm trying to remember if we left this one open specifically to track something. Right, it's on the short list because we want to revisit the handling of macros. I believe this is entirely unrelated to the current proposal for pub macro rules, which I think is on track at this point. Then back under active projects, I think Constaval proceeds apace. I don't believe there are any active updates on this one. Async Foundations, likewise, there's some ongoing work for discussion. Declarative macro repetition counts. We discussed this briefly in the last meeting, but I believe that we have lost our proposed liaison for this, that they no longer have the necessary bandwidth. So I think that this project may be temporarily moribund. There's still interest in it, but not necessarily bandwidth for anyone working on it. So we may want to close it appropriately, and instead of having it under active projects, we could put it on the short list. So I'm going to go ahead and move it over to the short list so that it's not sitting under active projects misleadingly. And then we should label and tag it appropriately. Any activity on const generics, number 51?
Min const generic stable 1.51, as I recall. I don't know that there's anything more than that.
Okay. Do we have a summary somewhere of the subset of const generics that will be stable in that release?
I mean, there's the stabilization report, but not beyond that, I think.
Okay, so there has been a stabilization report prepared then?
And
yeah, and we've
boxes
signed
checked
off on it.
So forth.
Right, okay.
I assume someone is going to be writing a blog post for the big blog because there's a lot of people who are going to care about this one.
Yeah, that one definitely deserves a dedicated blog post above and beyond the release notes.
So
go on.
With my release hat on, if Lane feels that that is the actual the correct thing to do, I don't know that release is the right people to write that blog post.
No, I don't think we would expect that from the release team. That would be more to ask than just simple release notes. I think someone who is an expert on the feature who's been shepherding it needs to write up an explanation of here's the subset you can use, that kind of thing. Here is what is available. So I think the right way to handle that would be to discuss it via the tracking issue. So given that, let me see, there doesn't actually appear to be a cross-link over to the tracking issue here. So I'm trying to dig up that tracking issue. There it is. It's in the summary, min const generics tracking issue, 74878. Okay. I will write a quick note to that issue suggesting that a announcement blog post, having a draft announcement blog post would be helpful.
Our liaison of record for this is Boats. Should we continue? Is that still the sort of active liaison we think, or we need to assign a different liaison?
We should, given that Boats will not be available for some time, then I think we do need to have another liaison for this, at least for the short term of getting the blog post up and similar. The longer term Const Generics project, not necessarily, but.
So the release will ship March 25th. So there is a considerable window of time to write that blog post. I don't think we should do it before it ships on stable.
No, of course not. I think we need to prepare that blog post, and then it should go up right around the time that that release is being prepared.
Sure.
But
yeah.
It's always nice when we're not scrambling in the last couple days before a release to put a post together. So. Okay, I posted a quick note there. Then we already covered the trailing semicolons and expression macro bodies item earlier. Safe transmute is continuing to work through the next round of iteration. There's been some ongoing discussion about design elements. I think that most of the issues have been resolved, but I think we should wait until that one is ready to come to another design meeting with the new approach. Moving on to the next column, RFC 2229 is planned for tomorrow's design meeting, I believe. And there is a document that Nico posted in Zulip under design meeting 2021-01-19. Actually, presumably that should be 2021-01-20. Let's fix that. Yes. There's a Zulip stream there with a design document. I will copy and paste the link to the HackMD into the agenda. And if people want to take a brief look of that sometime in advance of the meeting, that may help, but regardless, we should be going through that in the meeting. And then any updates on never type stabilization, FFI unwind, or instruction set? Okay. No updates on inline assembly, and then raw ref. I believe that there was some discussion in the last couple of weeks about trying to figure out if the names are sufficiently finalized that we can start recommending this as an alternative to existing things people currently do. Other than naming, I don't think there was any update this week. And I think that's it for the board, unless anybody has anything to add.
To be clear,
Okay.
the doubts in the raw ref thing, as far as I can tell, that was solely posed by Ralph himself. I don't see actual dialogue here.
I think there was some brief dialogue on Zulip, but very brief. Like the sum total of it was some discussion about wanting to recommend these as, for example, in suggestions in warnings or similar when trying to take references to things, that kind of thing. and then a brief mention from Ralph of we should get the naming finalized, and that was it. So this was not an extensive discussion, just an observation that we should either figure out that we're comfortable recommending these using their current names and or start figuring out what they should be called long term.
I think a big part of this was that Rustock didn't show things appropriately for a while, but that bug in Rustock has been fixed, so people got happier with the original names again.
That's good. Okay. Then next up we have a p-high issue on Rustlang Rust. We have 80988, a regression in 150 deny after forbid breaks build.
Oh yes, I've commented on this one, and you've commented on the PR that fixes it.
Right.
Or the PR with a proposed fix.
Right. Let's see, there it is. Yeah, it sounds like to summarize for the broader group here, the use of forbid on specific certain warnings creates a problem. I'm actually curious, this is saying deny after forbid breaks something, except that 81087, the PR that was proposing to fix this, was not about deny, it was about having an allow in the derive, I believe.
Well, so the PR 81087, it's not like specific to allow. It's any lowering of the forbid level within a derived macro.
Right.
That could be deny, that could be allow, it could be warn.
Right. So that makes sense. I'm more wondering oh, I see. So the error message that's mentioned in 80988 is not actually related to the code sample here. This is actually summarizing the other issue with using derive, in which case that was due to an allow. Separate from that, the forbid deny is an issue as well. Okay, that makes sense. So I think those are two separate regressions with potentially two separate ways of addressing them. The discussion in the PR and the response that I'd made was the comment that like this is kind of what forbid does. Allow after forbid seems like it would make forbid meaningless, but that's something we may want to discuss further. Separate from that, deny after forbid seems redundant but harmless. So if that's something that it sounds like that breaks several things.
It's not exactly harmless, because if you make deny apply to a method, then theoretically you can then allow it inside the method for a block inside the method. So the deny would still have to not apply.
Right. So question on that. Previously in 149 or before, this was, I'm assuming this wasn't a workaround for forbid. You couldn't forbid, then deny, then allow to ease it up to allow without a warning or error rather.
Well, so behavior before 150, so in 149 and before, forbid and deny, like on the same level, you would basically be able to edit. So the forbid would not really take effect until the next level. It would sort of declare itself, and then on the same level, which might be in a different file, in a different module because of inner and outer attributes, you would be able to sort of edit the things you said. And the behavior in 150 is that forbid immediately takes effect, and that makes forbid warnings, for example, really strong, because previously it sort of only affected warnings, but now it affects everything.
I see. And presumably, if someone may have used forbid warnings and then some denies to say, these are things I only want to deny, but I'm okay with allowing them.
Presumably, yeah. So the behavior, so the interesting thing is forbid previously, when you said forbid warnings, my understanding when I looked at the code is that it actually didn't actually take effect. Like if you wanted to, after a forbid warnings on a completely different level, you could still allow the lint. As long as you didn't allow warnings, you could allow any of the sublints
I see.
within the group. And
So
my
forbid
PR,
warnings would deny warnings, but forbid nothing,
it would
except the alias warnings itself.
essentially, yeah. So like groups weren't like you could raise things because a group wasn't treated as a group. Like we looked at the lint specifically and not the potential for other things to affect its level.
I see. So that sounds like there's 3 behavior changes here then. Or rather, one that is involving the use of warnings specifically, one regarding the use of deny, and one regarding the use of allow.
I don't think there's any change to deny specifically. There's 2 changes since 150 or since 149. The first one is that
Sure.
Individual lints are now like forbidden if the group is forbidden as well, and
Right.
that is actually that's the only change. But there are various effects of that.
Oh, I thought that there was also a change to make forbid take effect immediately rather than at a lower level. That was in a previous release or not at all?
Sorry, yes, that is also a change. Yeah, so the 2
Okay.
changes are that forbid takes effect immediately and that it also affects individual lints within a group.
Right. So that makes sense. And the reason I was saying 3 items, yes, it is 2 changes, but I think there's 3 behavioral cases that we may potentially want to decide on independently. We might, for example, want to say that forbid followed by allow is not something we want to support, but that forbid followed by deny, if you were to treat the deny as a redundant statement and leave it as forbid, might potentially be acceptable as one example of a decision we might make that would have 2 different behaviors, even though it's related to the same change.
Sure, I guess.
Just a process question here. I'm assuming that we are technically allowed by FCP, by accepted RFCs, to have this breakage because it is essentially warning levels, right?
Right. This is lints, and we are allowed to be stricter about lints in ways that cause people who use deny or forbid to get compile errors. That, although I think we are on a borderline case there, because normally a reason we allow that is because of cap lints.
Cap lint
but-
still applies to forbid, so that doesn't matter. This is only breakage in like local code.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, 77713 seems to suggest otherwise, that even with cap lints equal warn, that they did still get this issue.
Right, we fixed that bug. The only reason it's still open is
I
that
see.
there's a like unused lint. We don't actually tell you that the thing is unused if you cap lints and such. So that's a separate
I
thing.
see. Okay, so despite what the opening message of 77713 mentions, cap lints is no longer non-functional.
Correct. Yes. So if you
Okay.
cap lints warn, you'll never see a thing that says that you're incompatible with previous forbid, because forbid is only a warn essentially.
Got it. Which means even the forbid allow that is caused with derive is not actually causing a regression in dependencies, only in leaf crates.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So given that this is technically allowed and not borderline, but at the same time, if it's a sufficiently large regression, we may want to address it anyway.
So my opinionated summary here, and I'm saying opinionated because it is that this is really only a problem for people who are doing forbid warnings. Is that basically
I don't
true?
think that's not entirely true. That's one of the two major items. I think the whole forbid and allow or forbid and deny of the same warning within the same scope is mostly not an issue, except uh, this is now breaking people who did forbid unused qualifications, or for that matter, forbid warnings, and then used derive, which apparently uses allow and does something that would generate a warning with an allow, without an allow, I mean.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there are multiple cases that I've found, at least Serde and some apparently built-in macros generate allows for various lints.
Right, this is not uncommon.
Yeah.
So the case that I was making a couple of days ago in 81087 was that this was always what people who said forbid were looking for, insofar as it was supposed, I mean, there's not a lot of point in doing forbid to make sure that your own code can't do allow. It's kind of belt and braces safety, but presumably you're maintaining that project, so you can also just not allow something. I think it's helpful, and it's a good flag up at the top that you don't have to dig further into the code if you're reading it. But it seems like a substantial value here is don't allow the introduction of allows by other things, including things I might not see buried in a macro. If you
On
say
the other
forbid
hand,
unsafe, you don't want unsafe being used in a macro.
I'm pretty sure that the unsafe actually, like, I think some of the macros in Stud use unsafe internally, and they have like some sort of hygiene for not like that. Like you can put a thing on a macro that says this is hiding unsafe code, but forbid shouldn't apply to it, or deny or whatever.
Oh,
But I could be
interesting.
wrong.
So
I don't think that's
is
stable,
that
to
your,
be clear.
I was about to ask, is this Stid using something that lets it cheat?
I think so. Yeah, that's my recollection, but I
Yeah.
haven't like recently checked.
I
That is
can see both
unfortunate.
arguments on that one, because you can call a function that's using unsafe code from a forbid unsafe code. Great.
You can.
So part of me says that whether it's a function or a macro shouldn't matter to you. But changing this is also a gigantic change to hygiene.
Right. So presumably you would have had this issue before if you used allow within a nested scope, just not at the top level, right? This is related to, we now make forbid take effect immediately. So if you were already in a nested scope, like within a function, then allow wouldn't have been allowed and derive even wouldn't have been allowed. We just almost never do that inside an inner scope.
It seems like maybe it's also the lint group thing applying particularly, that maybe people aren't ever just saying forbid unused parentheses or something.
Yeah, it seems like that was perhaps potentially broader change than we had realized, fixing that
Sure.
bug in the grouping or whatever.
Right. Yeah. The group link grouping, I was baffled that it actually was a thing that we missed. But I think, like, in my opinion, that is an unambiguous bug fix. If you say forbid warnings, it seems really odd to not deliver.
Agreed. Yeah. The only issue is that people writing forbid warnings might not have gotten instant feedback that that's probably a bad idea until now. But yes, given that cap lints is a thing, then hopefully people will notice and address that. So yeah, I'm less concerned about the forbid warnings problem and more concerned about if somebody forbid a specific thing and then now finds they can't use derive. But even then, that is allowed breakage.
I think my current position is that breaking people who say forbid and then derive a macro that allows that is perhaps suboptimal, in the sense that like that macro is maybe not the best macro. Like, as a macro author, I would want to avoid using allow on things that people might want to forbid
Right.
for this reason. But beyond that, I guess I feel like it's the thing the user asked for if they said forbid, and if they didn't want it, they should say deny.
Yeah.
I would agree with this as well, yes. I do think if we're going to fix anything, the ideal fix would be to make derive no longer need to allow unused qualifications and instead just not have an unused qualification, if that's at all possible.
Well, there's two parts. There's two possibilities, right? You can make unused qualifications as a Rust-C lint. Like we have the ability to say this lint doesn't take effect in macro expansion, or at least I'm pretty sure we do, which means that we can potentially fix it that way too, and just say like there's no point to allowing it because it just doesn't get emitted inside macros, which is something many lints do.
That's actually perfectly fair. Unlike making forbid ineffectual in macros, which I don't think is a good idea, allowing specific lints in macros in general on the basis that they commonly happen when you write the kind of code that appears in a macro. We've done that before, and that doesn't seem unreasonable for unused qualifications, or in general, unused something in a macro doesn't seem unreasonable.
Yeah, I've had mixed feelings before. In some sense, it's useful. Like I would like for us to provide an opt-in of some kind, because it's as a sort of, when you write the macro, you often want to know if you are, generating useless parentheses or whatever. But as a sort of macro user, I agree that it is not helpful to me to have to know that this macro has unused qualifications or
Right, that
parentheses.
warning is exclusively useful to the person who wrote the macro, generally speaking, yes.
Yeah, I feel like here the takeaway from that point is basically that really what people want is either hygiene, or we should just stick with the current behavior.
That's actually an interesting point. The owner is the only one who cares. Like, could we use the fact whether the span comes from a local file versus the crates IO downloaded file as a way to guide whether to report the warning or not?
I think that's basically how the current, like in macro, like it's kind of similar to how the current in macro expansion lint.
Or could we
checking.
generalize that to like stylistic stuff, and can we classify lints in terms of whether the style ones versus unsafe checking stuff, that, and then like a general policy based on that?
I could imagine a general policy. I don't, like, the compiler is not in a way that they're categorized, but Lang can certainly propose such a policy, and then the compiler could be changed to apply it to the correct lints. But
okay, well, in the interest of trying to put a bound on this discussion, and we can always continue it later via either Zulip or GitHub, would it be accurate to say the general consensus is we don't want to revert the new behavior, but we might be open to some changes in other aspects of lint handling to reduce this breakage for things like derive, either fixing derive if that's an option, or having specific lints narrowly targeted to not apply within macros?
I am definitely in favor of, for 1.50, just saying this is the behavior, at most adding a warning of like, hey, you said forbid warnings, you don't want to do that. Have you heard about this thing called deny?
That's a fair point, yes. That's
But
probably
other
a
than
hammer
that,
people don't want, in that they will be breaking all the time.
right. But
that issue
I think
aside,
basically
yeah.
I'm fine with the behavior that exists in 1.50 because it's only forbid, and as we've discussed a couple times, forbid is a very strong hammer by design. So since it's an allowed change, it's someone using a extremely powerful hammer, then it has very powerful consequences, but that's okay.
Does anybody object to that consensus?
I don't object. I would like to see someone, I guess maybe Josh, you can do this, write it on the issue, and maybe, I don't know if FCP is the right thing, but it feels like there are multiple people on Lang not in this meeting.
Yes.
I agree. That was actually going to be my next suggestion was, Scott, since you just finished summarizing that very well, I wondered if you would be up for writing that on, I think 80988 is the issue that should be on, and then I will write a quick note
An FCP
on
close
8.1.
on that, basically.
Well, I'm not sure it should be closed quite yet, because I do think that we want to use that issue to track whether we may address, for instance,
So I think we should close the one that, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the item mentioned in the title of 80988, I think we should close and just say, no, don't do that. The 77713, or in general, the issue with derive, that one we should leave open on the basis of we may fix that by fixing derive or by changing what lengths apply in macros. So that one, wherever that's being tracked, should be open to track what we're doing to address it.
Yeah,
Right,
that's what I
spreadsheet
meant.
for that.
FCP closed
Okay.
the regression for 1.50 item as
Agreed.
yes, we propose to just do this in 1.50. And if other issues still exist that are where people consider other changes, that's fine. But for the purpose of 1.50 and getting that shipped, the behavior that is implemented is the behavior that we are proposing out of this meeting. We stick with for 1.50.
Agreed. Okay. Go ahead and post that to 80988, and I will post a note to 81087 mentioning that there's some discussion about this on 80988 and that we're also open to other ways of addressing derive specifically.
Wait,
Makes
does that
sense.
mean you're going to say like thumbs up to 81087, or you're going to say we haven't decided about 81087?
81088. No, I think that for 81087, the specific proposal PR is one that I don't think that we should accept, although I
Okay.
would propose that we use I would agree that we should use FCP to confirm that, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're opposed to the idea of some other approach, such as something specific to unused qualifications just generally not applying within macros.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Someone has a very loud keyboard, by the way.
That is probably me. I will finish typing that note up after the meeting so that we can go on to other items. One that, because we had a couple of large items, we may or may not have bandwidth to go through all the nominated PRs and issues, but one that is substantially overdue, I think, at this point is 79078. This is Petrochenkov's proposal to make derive a regular macro attribute rather than something built in. It might actually be worth checking if it still triggers the same warnings, which would give us yet another reason to potentially merge it if it does not. But that aside, all of the open issues in this have been addressed. I closed the perf-related blocker on the basis of our previous discussions that that's the compiler team's business and not ours to address. And apart from that, we are just waiting on checkboxes for figuring out whether to merge this. This is the kind of thing that tends to get conflicts very quickly. So it would probably be a good idea for us to go ahead and mark this and check things off if we're prepared to.
Do we know if Taylor's seen the things that they wanted to see for the concerns they had on this? I guess they're not marked as concerns, but.
So I believe that several of the things that he was mentioning are actually summaries of specific things we discussed in the meeting. And I think the main blocker was addressed already, specifically that the use of derive as a magically evaluate configuration really should deserve more discussion than just this was accidental and it seems useful. And based on that, Petrochenkov removed the ability to do derive and other attributes in an order that would allow other attributes to see that derive expands CFGs. So
cool.
this no longer has a visible effect on config evaluation anymore, which means I think that it should be substantially less controversial. And then later we can make a decision about if we want to allow it to expand config visibly, or if we want to create a separate thing for that, or any number of things. But yeah, I think that that all has been addressed, and we don't have enough people in this meeting to sign off, but if either Taylor or Nico gets a chance to check their box, and if Scott, if you're all right with this, then we would have 4 of the 6 people, which is enough. Anyway.
Okay.
Any other open items on that? Okay, moving on. It appears that OR patterns is still nominated. We should, we discussed this briefly last time, and I think the issue was that we want to get this on its way to stabilization. So we do have the pattern 2021 and pattern 2018 names, and those are both feature gated. So given that, I think we are reasonably prepared for an FCP to stabilize OR patterns. That would be 79278. I'm going to do a quick check to see if we have a let's see. Yeah, that looks like it's on track. So any objections for doing an FCP to merge 7927? Go on.
So there is still not a stabilization report that I've been able to find.
Good call.
I think that
you.
should precede a call to FCP merge so that we're not like all checking
agreed.
boxes
Let's not
on different things.
Let's make sure that we procedurally follow that. I will post a quick note asking for one. Okay, that's posted. So next up, we have never is the only type that is unsafe to raw pointer deref into a empty pattern. 79735.
Yeah, this one melds as usual into the issue that follows it. I think we did the same thing happen last week where these two are really coupled.
Right.
Together.
I remember the pair of these that there was a question of, are we willing to allow things that shouldn't happen in a context where they statically can be determined to not happen?
Right. So I haven't had a chance to implement the code that I want to implement because I was busy. But I'm unblocked now. I'm hoping to spend this week fixing this, or fixing in the sense of actually putting in the checks that we'd want for 80059.
Sounds good. In that case, I think that we want to skip both this issue and the next one until we have that code prepared.
I hope so. Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Next up, we have a potential policy decision, 80165, to promote 2018 warn lints to deny in Rust 2021. So 80165, let's take a look at that.
Question on this one. It says to deny in the header and into errors in the op. Is this making them errors or making them deny by default?
I believe this is making them deny. I don't believe that any of these are proposed for hard errors.
Yeah, I meant deny. I was just sloppy in my wording here.
Perfectly fine. I use the same thing, make them errors, when we mean like make this deny by default. Honestly, there's very good argument. It's going to be unusual for us to turn something like this into a hard error unless we have some long-term plan to reclaim syntax or similar.
So the one where hard error has been discussed, I think, was bare trade objects.
Okay.
That there
Which
was
is
something
already a warn, right? Yeah, it's already
yes,
a warn,
I think
and
so.
there's a. Okay.
Even then, would we ever go straight to hard error, or would we stage it? First go to deny by default and then hard error in another edition? Is that too long of a the future to really think about?
If we can't turn on warn in a previous edition, I think we definitely would never do that because it would take like 9 years to do anything.
Right. I don't think we need to step up warn, then deny, then hard error over 3 editions. I think that we shouldn't go directly from allow to hard error in an edition under almost any circumstances if we can help it. But going deny, then hard error seems reasonable. Going warn, then hard error seems plausible depending on how strenuous the warning text is. If it goes out of its way to say this won't be allowed in the future, then we might be able to. I think the more interesting question is, you said there was discussion about making this a hard error. Where is that discussion taking place, and what is the rationale? Is there a desire to use this
I'm trying to
syntax for
remember
something
that,
else?
sorry. I think it's something about const generics, that the parsing of things gets weird
I
with,
see.
or there's something about we can generate better error messages because if you don't have the deny, then it has to be a const generic or something.
You're right. I just found it. It's in Lang Team issue 65. Varkor is mentioning that this would allow better error messages for const generics if we're willing to make this an error, a hard error. So I would suggest that we decide on these independently, and I would propose that we do 2 separate FCPs. One FCP on 80165 for the proposal to promote all of these to deny. Now, again, the open question is we still need to review several of these. It sounds like several of these are uncontroversial. Some of these may potentially be questionable.
So,
but if we're going to decide these, we could do an FCP on 80165.
I think I liked what you said earlier of let's split these up. If it should be a relatively straightforward chain PR to change a single one of these lints from to be denied by default in 2021, right?
Presumably, yes. It should be a very trivial PR.
I'm feeling like the Clippy discussion, it would be good to have like one thing for each of them, because otherwise we're going to get bogged down in trying to discuss all 7 of them in the one GitHub issue. And
that seems entirely reasonable. And then
that having this as one tracking issue is still valuable, and we'll check them off here with the PRs as they go in or whatever. But that if we split them up into separate ones, that'll probably help the simple ones go quickly and give a more specific place for discussing harder things. Like I remember elided lifetimes and paths, people have some objections to in some of the positions for whether the tick underscores are valuable or not, or a bunch of things
Okay.
like that.
That makes sense, and I think that's strictly better than what I was originally going to propose, which was using Lang Team issue 65 to do a FCP on do we want to make bare trait objects a deny, or rather a hard error. If we're going to do that, we could just have that be a separate item for discussion along with the rest and just decide, do we want to make this a hard error or a deny?
Yeah. Since we have
I
Mara
would
here,
agree
do you
with that
want to
proposal.
comment on this, Mara, if that sounds horrible to you for any reason?
No, that sounds perfect. I was just filing this issue to make sure we don't lose track of it. So I just copied pasted all the
appreciated.
issues we need to discuss in here. But I think
Perfect.
there's a discussion going on for each of them, so we should probably split it. Sounds good.
Yeah. I think for all of them other than bare trait objects, it probably makes sense to have this discussion on a PR that is making them deny by default, and then we can FCP merge those. For bare trait objects, it sounds like we'll need to discuss whether we want deny by default or hard error. So we may want to have that discussion on a dedicated issue rather than having somebody prepare a PR that may turn out to not be the one we want.
I think there's currently no mechanism to change the default depending on the edition. I think
There used to be.
Okay, maybe I looked at it for like 5 seconds. Maybe I missed it.
Okay.
If it's already there, then
Yeah, I
they'll
don't know if
just
it
check the
changed.
LPR. So it sounds
Okay.
good.
But
I'll add for bare trade objects that if we accepted a PR to make it deny by default, we could just say, yes, we're moving forward on that. And if it then also gets a later PR to become error by default, that would be okay too. But it looks like we got 1 minute left, so I'm gonna have to drop
Right.
shortly.
okay. You said that you're currently filing an issue to keep track of this and make sure this doesn't get lost. Where is that issue being filed?
No, I was talking that this was the issue for the errors. There is no, there is a project board for all of the 2021 edition things instead
Right.
of a tracking issue. I guess I'll just add a comment to this warning issue that this should be just a overall tracking issue to leave the individual discussion to the PRs.
Sounds good. And yes, to make sure that we're respecting people's time, I think that is the cutoff point for what we got to in this meeting. So there are 5 items below that that we did not yet get to. We can discuss those further either on Zulip or next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.